and Spiritual Care in the 21st Century, which she co-edited with Dr. Wendy Cadge. This book provides a roadmap for training and renewing chaplains across a variety of settings, including hospitals, prisons, universities, military, and nursing homes. Chaplaincy and Spiritual Care in the 21st Century is comprised of essays written by a team of multidisciplinary experts that draws upon research pursued at the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab at Brandeis University. And I'm also grateful to have with us two scholars who will provide their reflections on the book, Dr. David Cho and Reverend Mary Martha Thiel. Dr. David Cho is Assistant Professor of Spiritual Care and Counseling, and we're delighted to welcome as a new faculty member who started with us this fall. His current project is his forthcoming book, Making Sense of Life with God, Religious Stories Dreamers Tell in the Face of Uncertainty. And I'm also delighted to welcome Reverend Mary Martha Thiel as our second panelist. Reverend Thiel is the Director of Clinical Pastoral Education at Hebrew Senior Life. She has been a national leader in teaching spiritual care of the non-religious. With support of grant funding from the Carpenter Foundation, Reverend Mary Martha Thiel has developed a specialized CPE training unit focused on the spiritual needs of LGBTQ+ elders. And she's also an author, I believe, in one of the chapters in the book that we're celebrating today. So please join me in welcoming our guests.
Thank you, Dean Puck, and thank you for taking time out to come here about a long conversation that produced a book. That's really what this is. It's a collective work of 40 plus educators, social scientists, educators from theological schools, and folks from CPE sites. This is a celebration really of work we did together, and I'm really thrilled that Mary Martha can be with us as one of the section editors for the book, so one of the authors, but also somebody who is who's doing just a lot in the Boston area, but especially with our students, and increasingly a teacher in this setting. So just thanks for coming out. I often give this pitch. This is the big conversation. The book is the product of the Educating Effective Chaplains Loose Grant that was shared with BU and Brandeis. This is a long relationship that I have with Wendy Cadge, who, when we first were starting to think about how we do chaplaincy at BU, I had Wendy come in as a kind of informal consultant because the book that she wrote, Paging God, had at the end of the book recommendations for theological educators, and I read it and I said, Wendy's local, would she come advise us? So this is a long relationship that really started with Wendy in probably 2015. Grant worked together that, as you can see from the dates, was upended by the pandemic. That's really important because the book changed. The book is the product really of also serious reflection around what was happening in 2020, what was happening with chaplains in 2020 and the care that they provided, and also a gap in the literatures around chaplaincy specifically related to racial disparities. That the people who are providing the care often don't represent the demographic that they're serving. This became extremely apparent in 2020. So a lot of our work, we started with a gathering down in the community center. You can see our local site here. Our first gathering was in summer 2019, and then the pandemic happened. So we had hoped to have yearly gatherings, a lot of connection. But Mary Martha was there, and I'll just say this conversation with 50 plus people in the room, we had educators, we had endorsers, we had CPE supervisors, and theological educators across the country coming together to say, where are the gaps in chaplaincy? What are you doing? Why are we not talking? What are we actually about? So that conversation, the long, really deep dive conversation lasted, and a lot of products came out of that. This is just one. Notice that this also dovetailed with the launch of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, which has become kind of a center for resourcing, networking at Brandeis. And so my continued involvement with the Chaplaincy Lab, I became one of the advisors for the lab. And so there was just a lot going on. I was kind of at STH, but a lot here. And that was just the wonderful thing that could happen during a sabbatical. So I had that conversation. So a lot of the lived products are connected now to the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, things that we did from our conversation. As you'll see, we wanted to think about what are we doing across in our sectors and silos, how are theological educators training people to go into the profession of chaplaincy. When they leave or in the middle of theological education, we hand them over to places like Hebrew Senior Life, where Mary Martha is a CPE supervisor. Many theological educators do not know who the CPE supervisors are in their city or in their location. This is a problem. So this led to a lot of educational work with like, what are you doing in CPE? What are we doing in the theological curriculum? And our question was, is there a bigger endeavor? Can we do a more coordinated, give more coordinated attention to the training of professional chaplains? This is my fancy chart to show some of the problems, and what I think we need is increased feedback loops. So we have employers of chaplains, we have working chaplains, we have chaplaincy educators in CPE sites and theological schools, we have certifying bodies and endorsers. This is not, like, those arrows are not a beautiful fluid dynamic relationship. Often people, and I want to say this because students who are training for chaplaincy get caught in these. They don't know, there's ignorance here about what goes on over here, about nobody's talking to employers about, like, what do they look for when they hire a chaplain? Whoa, huge gap, nobody knows. Except the employer knows, but we're not talking to them. So what I'm showing is this question of, like, there's a history to chaplaincy, there's the social scientists and historians are helping us map the landscape of the changing demographics of chaplaincy. There are present challenges and opportunities that often people like Mary Martha see much more clearly than I do. And then there's this question about what's the future. I think chaplaincy is the future of religious leadership. I say this all over and it doesn't make me popular here. I say it also because we're training amazing students here to do chaplaincy. And there's so much energy around, like, moving into a field that's rapidly changing, and I want people to get jobs, you know? So some of this, it just put my feet on the ground about this, and thinking about what are we really doing? Is the aim of what we're doing to alleviate suffering? Maybe. Is it to accompany people through life transitions? Yes. I mean, so the end towards which we're doing all that we're doing is still, I think, I want to have another in-person gathering about all that. So you can see here some of the things we were engaging with, like data sets around what's the changing religious demographic. If more people are identifying as non-religious, what does that mean for chaplains? Curriculums, nobody has the same curriculum across theological schools, but there's a lot of people developing chaplaincy programs. They're not talking to each other. So I say this with, like, generosity and not criticism. It's everybody's doing a lot of things, but grants make it possible for people to connect. And that's what I feel like we had just the privilege of doing. And we're specifically, you know, a deep concern around the pipeline for chaplains, especially from underrepresented groups. That could be religious minority groups, racial groups, chaplains of color. Those demographics are just, they're poor in terms of, like, who we're actually training for the field. This is how the book is organized. And it was the audacious thing to organize it around. We think all chaplains in all sectors need to have three competencies. They're big, but, like, we don't agree on much across sectors, but it's like all chaplains need to be able to have interpersonal competencies around providing care interpersonally. They need to know something about the organizations in which they serve. Those are organizational would be meaning making, or existential. We had a lot of debate about the language. Some people said, well, this is the theological meaning, this is the theological competency, but some traditions don't identify as theistic. So we, organize that around the meaning-making work that chaplains do. It was collaboratively written. Mary Martha could probably say a little bit more about that we wanted a theological educator paired with a CPE educator in writing the chapters. Social scientists did the mapping first couple chapters, really helpful. The literatures around chaplaincy are largely, the history of the literature is, just to be reductive, largely white Protestant. Protestants writing the books, determining what chaplaincy education should look like. This book is just pulsing through all the chapters of commitments to diversity, justice issues, and we just really held authors' feet to the fire on those commitments. It's being picked up as we want it to be. We hope it's a major textbook for chaplaincy courses. People are already using it as textbooks, so we're getting good feedback. You'll see the different authors, but I'm going to hold up Mary Martha's chapter, and just that's enough for me. I'll hand it over to you. So textbook, everybody should adopt it. All of the proceeds go to the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. So that's another to kind of support the ongoing work. Mary Martha.
Okay. Please forgive me the mask. The people that I work with are average 90 years old and very fragile, and that requires that I be very cautious in terms of wearing a mask. So if you can't hear me, let me know. I'll try to speak up. So one of the things I loved about this book is that it really is at the edge pushing our language about what we do as chaplains. Chaplaincy has changed, I can't tell you how much, in the 35 years that I've been in it. And so from the get-go in this book, they're talking about chaplains learning to translate between sacred and secular discourses. So I'm kind of the spiritual care of the non-religious person. That's just a different way of talking about that chaplains have to be able to code switch. And I love that this book does that. So you'll see here, section 4, it follows the introductory stuff, the history and context, the meaning making, the interpersonal, and the final piece is this organizational competencies part. And Barbara McClure, who teaches practical theology and practice at Bright, was my co-editor, and we wrote the introduction to it and a case study, and then we had three authors. Nathan White is a military chaplain. Suyan Pak works at Union Theological Seminary. You may know her. And Lori Garrett-Cabina is another CPE educator. And amongst those three authors, we had diversity of gender, race, class, quite a bit of perspective that I hope it really enriched what we were doing. I was trained, like the other chaplains of my generation, in the therapeutic model of chaplaincy, which these days would fall in the sort of interpersonal category of what's here. And I really have had to learn over the years to move into what they're now calling the communal contextual paradigm of chaplaincy. And the part that is really, I think, the most cutting edge about this book is this section 4, the organizational competencies, because people don't quite have a handle yet on the organizational competencies part of being a chaplain. The question that fuels me the most is how can I as a chaplain work for organizational change in the organization that I serve to move it in the direction of human flourishing. So it's not just me and a patient, me and a family member, me and a staff person, but it's thinking about the whole and how can I, as one little person, one in a liminal position, actually function to shift the culture of an organization. And that's the theme that underlies these three chapters. So I think that's pretty exciting. In the past year at Hebrew Senior Life, we did a sequence of CPE units for this one cohort. We did chaplain as person, which lots of programs cover. We did chaplain as clinician. We really focused on working across tradition and working with people with psychiatric illness. And then the third one was chaplain as leader. And I had a lot of fun putting that together. All the students were actually staff chaplains in our place. So we used what was happening on the various Hebrew Senior Life campuses to think about how they could facilitate the kinds of values in the processes that were happening in the various crises on various campuses. It was really cool. I had them read chapter 11, The Emotional Undercurrents of Organizations. And that particular chapter demands that we look at race, gender, and class when we're thinking about our roles and how we fit. And so this chapter served as one lens of a number that helped us look at those three items. Healthcare, in the settings where I work, providers are largely female, they're largely of color, they're largely working class. Our patients are largely female, largely white, largely Jewish, and then a real mix of quite professional class and very impoverished. Well, wow, does that make for interesting conversation and interesting power dynamics to talk about and to become aware of. So I was trying to help students start thinking about their role, their goal, and the context in a particular situation. And that language comes from systems thinking. It's really useful for chaplains. So then I run an alumni group for people who've done CPE at our place. They come in once a month. They rotate who presents clinical material, and it's sort of like CPE on steroids. It's like people, really functioning at a very high level, and they work in all different kinds of contexts. It's really fun. So early this fall, I had them read the part 1 of chapter 10 through a multi-frame lens, surviving, thriving, and leading organizations. So this chapter presents the Bullman and Deal framework of 4 ways of looking at organizations that can help someone make decisions, and then adds the white racial frame as sort of a corrective to that original model. I had the students take the sort of free self-assessment to see, okay, where do they default in terms of the way they look at organizations? And then we read together the case study from this section. The case study is about a director of spiritual care who over a number of years works to raise the profile of religious and spiritual support in the context of interpersonal violence. And some of the case moves toward the creating of an annual memorial service for the people in Massachusetts who die in a given year from interpersonal violence. And it traces all the groups this director of spiritual care works with, how long it takes, where's the resistance, how does she get around it, what happens. And the good news is when she finally leaves that particular employment, there's been enough momentum that that process is retained in that particular institution. So hospitals tend to be really structured. They tend to really function with a structural frame, like things you can put on an organizational chart. Chaplains tend to work in the symbolic frame. So we are representational in the way we present ourselves, in the way we understand ourselves. The point of the article is that the most effective leadership involves a person being able to look through multiple frames in order to make a decision in a given situation. And seeing from multiple perspectives is a plain old basic chaplain competence, but now applied at an organizational level. So I haven't done it yet, but the next thing I'll do is use case studies that are part of, that are connected to this textbook, that are free, they're online, they come from different sectors, they play to different kinds of learners, they're interactive, they're really great tools, and I will use them to help students practice seeing and making decisions in various contexts about effective leadership, around how do we make the places where we're working, where we're serving, support human flourishing. So that's me.
So I'm going to share my reflection from the perspective of a theological educator as well as pastoral theologian, pastoral theologians have been playing important roles in developing chaplaincy education, spiritual care, pastoral care education. We're often the ones that will teach intro courses in North American theological institutions. So, when I was a second-year seminarian, I did the very first unit of CPE while concurrently taking a course in pastoral care. This combination of in-class learning and field-based contextual training offered invaluable opportunities for my own formation, not only as a student of theological education, but also as a practitioner of spiritual care. I knew that I was becoming a practitioner because I was not only learning about spiritual care in the classroom, but also practicing spiritual care in the field. In retrospect, this unique experience of integrating psychological, theological knowledge and experiential learning in chaplaincy has profoundly shaped my identity as a theological educator who firmly believes that in order to train practitioners, the practice of care has to be both taught and caught. That's why I'm convinced that teaching spiritual care and practical theology, religious practices in general, involves different kinds of teaching and learning. Particularly in Intro to Spiritual Care course, my primary aim is to guide, educate, and empower our students to become competent practitioners of spiritual care who will be better equipped and prepared as they enter into various settings of chaplaincy. In designing this intro course for the STH setting this past summer, I wrestle with and reflect deeply on the following pedagogical questions. How can I provide learning opportunities for our students to develop practical, on-the-ground skills of listening, theological reflection, and meaning-making for interreligious environments. How can I design lectures, discussions, in-class activities, and written assignments that enable students not only learn, but also catch practice of care? In the midst of this professional crisis, crisis means good thing in psychology. It means exploration, right? So, yes. In my professional crisis as an emerging scholar and a teacher, this newly published volume became truly a spiritual companion that gently invited me to this generative dialogue with fellow theological educators like me, clinical educators who actually train chaplains in the field, as well as social scientists and historians to lay the groundwork for spiritual care education in the present as well as the future. In using this book to teach spiritual care, for theological educators and students, the voices and the practical wisdom from the chaplains and their educators have been enormously helpful for me to learn what it means and what it looks like to practice spiritual care in the changing religious demographics in North America. For example, based on chapter 6, titled Interpersonal Competencies for Cultivating Spiritual Trust, written by Carrie Doring and Allison Kastenbaum, I was able to develop a new assignment called Deep Listening Conversation. Adam's here. So with Deep Listening Conversation, really with the support and advice from Carrie Doring. In this assignment, each student records a spiritual care conversation with another learning partner via Zoom. In this experiential deep listening exercise designed for interreligious context, students learn to become a respectful guest who has been invited to visit another person's spiritual home with radical respect for alterity. Afterwards, students rewatch. They generally don't like this part. Rewatch themselves. Rewatch their recording, and they write self-reflection paper that they are challenged and invited to reflect on their practices of self-differentiation, interpersonal empathy, and self-reflexivity in conversation with the concepts and the authors from this book. Moreover, the perspective of social scientists and historians open our horizons, theological educators, our horizons to understand this historical moment with clarity, and also to imagine what's coming, the growing demands of chaplaincy and preparation across diverse sectors in North America and hopefully beyond North America, because largely this is America and Canada. I can say many more things, but I was only given 5 minutes. So in the end, this kind of transdisciplinary and transnational collaboration is not possible without a clear vision and commitment of leaders who are dedicated to create spaces for mutual respect and trust, and alliance and solidarity. Because interdisciplinary work is really hard. We say it is as such a cool thing, but those who are doing it, it's actually a difficult work. So as an emerging participant of this collaboration, I want to thank Dr. Shelly Rambo and also Dr. Wendy Cadge for not only learning, but also catching the vision of chaplaincy education and creating this generative space for all of us to envision the work of chaplaincy and spiritual care that are educationally inclusive, culturally responsive, and socially just for all persons